Well, friends, we want to welcome you once again to the Crosstown Church of Christ, our online Wednesday night summer series that we've been offering here. And we're thankful for all those who've been joining us and watching these videos. And we hope that we're soon going to be able to be back at the building. And I'll have more to say about that at the end. But we have once again tonight a guest speaker that has recorded his lesson. And I'm real excited to have Matt Dabbs with us here. That's our speaker. Matt is the preaching minister for the Auburn Church of Christ in Auburn, Alabama. And so that's right, we have gone deep into SEC territory, and we've brought this preacher to speak to us, and you're going to be blessed, I know, by Matt's lesson. Matt had previously, before began serving in 2016 with the Auburn Church of Christ, had been the pulpit minister for the Westside Church of Christ in Bakersfield, California. He had also served as an associate minister in St. Petersburg, Florida, where he is from originally. Matt is married to his wife, Missy, and they have two sons, Jonah and Elijah. Matt has his Master of Divinity from Harding School of Theology. He also has an unfinished PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Florida. Matt has a couple of very popular blogs or websites that he's a prolific writer and editor in our fellowship. One of those is Kingdom Living, where he has a number of relevant topics and articles with theology and matters pertaining to church that you might enjoy. He's also the editor and co-owner of the Wineskins publication, which is now online exclusively and at wineskins.org. And so Matt is well-versed. He is someone who interacts with a lot of folks in our fellowship and churches of Christ. He's a great thinker. He's an encourager. He's a promoter of unity and dialogue. And so I thought he would be a perfect fit and opportunity as we're talking about these conversations with Jesus from the Gospel of John. And Matt's going to take a little different approach tonight. He's going to talk about this idea of the power of conversations and what we've learned from Jesus' approach and what that means for us as we engage in healthy, loving conversations with others. And so we're excited that Matt's going to bring this lesson. Let's go ahead and have a prayer before he speaks. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for the blessings and the wonder of technology that we're able to have good men like Matt who can speak to us here at Crosstown. We're thankful for his years of service, for his years of study, and for his writing and interaction with so many in our great fellowship. And we just pray that we'll listen and have tentative ears and open hearts as he brings this message. We pray you'd bless him and his family and his work there at the Auburn Church of Christ. And we're thankful for your word. And we pray that you would bless us as we open and study it this evening. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Matt Dabbs. I'm the preaching minister at the Auburn Church of Christ and the editor at wineskins.org. I'm so appreciative that you have chosen to tune in to this video on conversations with Jesus in the Gospel of John. And I'm going to be walking through several conversations in the Gospel of John to make a point about how Jesus interacts with people and what that teaches us about how we can interact with others. Some of John's disciples are following Jesus. And Jesus turns around to these people who are literally physically following him. They're not following him as his disciples. They're like just walking behind him, following him around. Jesus says, "What do you want?" Hard to know what kind of tone that had, but that's what he asked them. And they say, "We want to know the place where you're staying." And Jesus doesn't say, "Well, I just happen to be staying at 4736 South Main Street." He doesn't say, "I'm staying at Aunt Becky's house." He says, "Come and see." The perfect Jesus answer. Jesus is inviting them into kingdom participation. He doesn't always give them all the cut and dried answers, although Jesus knows all things. In other places in the Gospel of Mark and other places where people are grumbling and he's talking about forgiving a guy's sins and they grumble about this. And Mark says Jesus knew their hearts. He knew their thoughts. Jesus knows everything. Jesus knows the answer to where he's going, obviously, and Jesus doesn't always just tell people what they want to hear. He doesn't always give them a direct answer. He could be like, "Well, yeah, I'm going to Steve's house." Like, "Oh, great, he's going to Steve's house." He's like, "You know what? The point of all this is not just getting to Steve's house. The point of all this is for you to come with me and see how this goes. That's the real point. I'm very analytical, I'm cut and dry. I would be more one just to say, well, we know you asked the question of where are you going? I'm going to tell you where I'm going. Well, no, Jesus knows there's more at stake than just giving them the answer to their question, because Jesus knows truly what people need. And when Jesus is answering their question, he's not giving them the answer that they want, he's giving them the answer that they need, which is an invitation to divine participation. He's asking them to come and be a part of what he's doing. Come with me, come along. It's an invitation. In essence, it's a sense of acceptance and belonging that Jesus is extending to these disciples. And this kind of participation carries on in John chapter 1. So Jesus says in 138, what do you want? They ask where he's going. He says, come and see. And from that point on, Andrew gets involved, and then Peter gets involved, and I think Philip gets involved. And Jesus is again allowing them to participate in this. Andrew is calling Peter, and people are inviting each other. It all starts with Jesus. If he had just said, I'm going to such and such street, they would have been like, oh, great, now we know where Jesus is, leave it at that. He invites, and then they invite. He invites these two followers of John, and then other people start taking notice and start inviting other people, all in John chapter 1. When I was a kid, I grew up in Missouri, near St. Louis, a little town called Union, and within an hour or two of Union, there were some pretty famous caves. Merrimack Caverns was probably the most famous one, and another cave called Onondaga Cave. And I remember those caves very, very well. I have very sketchy memories of the early years of my childhood, but I remember going to those caves, and I remember seeing specific rock formations. And I remember at Merrimack Caverns them talking about how they had filmed an episode of Lassie there. I remember them talking about how Jesse James and his gang back in the 1800s had hidden out in Merrimack Caverns as a hideout for them robbing and doing all the nefarious things that they were up to. I remember that not just because I read it in a National Geographic or something. I remember it because my parents took me there to see it for myself, to participate and to engage in seeing something new and different and fascinating. This is what Jesus is doing with his disciples. He's engaging them and inviting them to participate in kingdom experiences rather than just giving an answer. My parents could have said, well, there's a cave called Merrimack Caverns and it's an hour from here and it's pretty amazing and it has some of the oldest rock formations in the world. Don't you know Jesse James hid out there? I might have remembered that if they had told me that. Probably not. But to go there and see it and hear the tour guides explain it has a whole nother level of understanding and remembrance. Jesus is impressing on people the gospel of the kingdom in experiential ways that they can remember, that they can pass on. There are several other stories like this, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my Bible to the Gospel of John, and you're welcome to do the same. And if we go to John chapter 3, you all have probably already been over Nicodemus, but I think it illustrates the point. In John chapter 3, a Pharisee named Nicodemus comes in the middle of the night to talk to Jesus and ask him some questions, and they have this really kind of confusing exchange. And Jesus talks about being born again. And Nicodemus doesn't understand what that means. And Nicodemus is left to wonder about it. Do I enter in again to my mother's womb? What is this born again thing? And then Jesus talks about being born of water and the Spirit and how the Spirit goes wherever the Spirit wants. And this is how it is to be in the kingdom. Jesus is not very direct. It's actually pretty confusing. But the thing I think Jesus is doing here is he's allowing Nicodemus room to imagine, room to put seemingly conflicting thoughts in his head and have to process them. He has to wrestle with them to come to his own understanding, his own path through the words of Jesus to come to some kind of understanding, which is a much larger investment of mental faculties, time and energy than for Jesus just to say, hey, I'm just talking about the Holy Spirit, and maybe I'm talking about physical birth and baptism of water and the Spirit, or it's all baptism, water, and the Spirit, and let me just explain all this to you so that it's not confusing. Jesus allows people to be confused, to allow them to wrestle with what he's saying, so that what they process and the outcome of their conclusions are something that they own, not just something that they were told and would forget. The things that you come to conclusions of your own are things that you don't readily forget. And Jesus' purpose is not just to answer questions and offer clarity, it's to allow people to invest and participate in the kingdom process so that they own the answers and conclusions and the experiences that they've had along the way. Think about the very next chapter in John chapter 4. It's the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and he's having this exchange with her when he asks her in verse 7 if she will give him a drink. And she says in verse 9 of John 4, the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews," John says, "do not associate with Samaritans." Verse 10, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him for a drink, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank it from himself, as did also his sons and flocks and herds?" And Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of living water welling up to everlasting life." And then she says, "Sir, give me this water so I won't have to get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." Now, there's a lot of speculation over this. She's had all these husbands and she's sleeping with a guy who's not her husband, and maybe she fears the judgment of the town to come out early in the morning when it's cool with the other women, and who says what about who, and she's avoiding that. She's there at the heat of the day. Maybe she's avoiding social judgment and condemnation. We don't really know. But she clearly doesn't want to have to keep coming back this well. Maybe it just saves her time and energy. She doesn't understand what Jesus is saying. And Jesus is perfectly okay with that. He's going to keep pressing and keep working and keep talking. And she finally kind of subconsciously almost gets this. Like, about the Messiah and where we're supposed to worship is at this mountain Gerizim or in Jerusalem. And you Jews say this and we say that. But he is allowing her to enter into a state of confusion or frustration, to have to wrangle her thoughts around what it is he's saying to come to her own conclusion. And by the end of it, she gets it. She actually goes into the town and invites the town to come and see the Messiah. She's like the first evangelist is a Samaritan woman who's had all these relationships. Like, she gets sent out to tell other people about Jesus. It's kind of amazing. It's mind-boggling. If Jesus had just said, "Hey, look, I'm the Messiah, and would you give me some water? But I also have this really amazing water, and I want you to have it too, and you'll never thirst again," she probably would have laughed at him, honestly. Like, who are you to just come in here saying all these things? Jesus just doesn't come out and say it. Just like with Pilate in John 18 and 19, especially chapter 19. Jesus doesn't just come out and say it. Imagine Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Well, he said, "It is as you say." Other Gospels record that. Gospel of John doesn't get into that, and I don't want to veer too far from the Gospel of John. But the crowd is all stirred up in John 18, John 19, and Pilate is very frustrated by this. And he keeps going back to Jesus and asking him these questions. Jesus is allowing Pilate to work through his own process here. Jesus isn't just like, "Yes, I'm the Messiah, and I'm in, what is this competition with Caesar, and who's the king, and I'm the real king." Pilate would have laughed at him. But instead, Jesus gives him just enough to wrestle with, just enough to be frustrated, just enough to have to try to figure this out. And Pilate realized this is an innocent man. If Jesus had come out guns blazing about Caesar and king and all this kind of stuff, it may not have turned out the same way. But he piques Pilate's curiosity. He allows Pilate to engage his imagination in what the possibilities are with this strange man who does not talk like anyone else he's ever met. You ask Jesus a question, he may not give you the answer you want. He's going to give you the answer that you need, because he's going to give you an answer that's going to allow you or put you into a position of mental frustration that you are going to have to work and invest yourself in the outcome of the conclusion that you reach about Jesus. He's not afraid to be misunderstood. You see, we're afraid to be misunderstood because we're very insecure with ourselves, and we think, well, if I'm misunderstood, I must be a bad teacher, and then people will think poorly of me. Jesus isn't concerned about what you think about him in the sense of, like, do you think he's this or that? Like, he's concerned if you think he's Messiah, but that's the whole point. He's going to give you each little piece that you need for you to wrestle with coming out to your own conclusion rather than him just telling you. Think about, this is, again, I don't want to veer too far from John, but Mark 8, "Who do you say I am?" Some say this and some say that. Then Jesus says, "What about you? No, I'm asking you, who do you say I am?" And again, but to that point, anyone who said he's Messiah before Mark 8, he said, "Shh, don't talk about that, be quiet." And now he finally says, when Peter confesses, "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus says, "That is true, Peter, that is right. Now that you understand that, you're ready for part 2. Here's what that means. The Son of Man is going to suffer, he's going to be arrested, he's going to die, and he's going to rise on the third day. And Peter was not ready quite to hear it. But first he had to come to grips with Jesus being Messiah. And then later he's going to come to grips as Jesus begins to let this unfold and gives them just enough information at a time to let them wrestle with it and come to their own conclusions about who he is and what it is that he's doing. And so, again, let me give you some more examples of this in the Gospel of John. In John chapter 5, so we've gone through 3, 4, we're now in 5. Jesus is at the pool of Siloam. There's a lame man there, and they have this myth that when the water bubbles from this pool, from this spring, that the first person who needs healing in is the first one healed, is the only one healed. And this guy's too slow to get in. He can't get in himself. He needs help. He's like, I don't know what to do. And in John chapter 5, verse 6, Jesus engages him in the process. He asks him a question. He says, do you want to get well? That seems like a ridiculous question to ask a person who can't walk. But it's a necessary question. It's a necessary question for that man to wrestle with. You know what? What would life be like if I got well? What would life be like if I got better and there weren't people just coming and bringing me food and all this? I'd have to get up on my own, literally, on my own 2 feet. And there's things I'm going to have to do that I'm not doing well. Do I really want to get well? Is this something I really want to engage myself in? Because getting well can stink, because we're used to homeostasis. We're used to staying in the same state, and we learn to do very well the state that we find ourselves in, even if it's a bad state of being. This is why abusers often abuse, because it's what they know. So do you want to get well? He invites him to participate in considering what it is that's about to happen to him, because he needs to participate in his own life. He needs to participate in his own faith. This man needs to participate in his own beliefs. And then they go into this whole thing about who healed you and who was this man. What do you think about him? John chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000. And in chapter 6, verse 5 and 6, I love these verses. It says, when Jesus looked up and saw the great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. It's just so Yoda, right? It's just so Jesus. Like, I know what I'm going to do, but if I tell him, he's not going to have the same opportunity as if I engage him in the process. So Jesus lets Philip wrestle with this problem. Look, Philip, okay, Jesus is discipling him. Jesus is teaching him while Jesus is there. Jesus is eventually going to leave when Philip's not going to have any help. So in the meantime, Jesus is presenting Philip with the problem. Philip, how would you handle this? And Philip is left to his own mindset of, like, how do we solve problems of hungry people? We feed them. Okay, how many people do you have? How much food do you need? He gets into logistics of this, and there's no good answer to this. It's like, we don't have enough food to do this. And so then Andrew finds a boy who has loaves and a fish. Again, they're participating, like, hey, go solve the problem. Well, here's a kid with some fish and some bread. Maybe that's a start, at least. But the disciples are moving. The disciples are working. The disciples are thinking. The disciples are trying to figure out how to get from point A, hungry people, to point B, full people, without the resources in the middle. And Jesus already knows what he's going to do. And then he continues to invite the disciples to participate. Hey, seat all these people on the ground. And then he begins blessing and multiplying, and they all eat. And then he says, hey, each of you pick up the pieces. And guess how many baskets of pieces that were left over, John tells us. There were 12 baskets. All 12 disciples are participating in the cleanup effort. Jesus could have just whisked it all away, I imagine, into nothingness. But he just, no, you need to go pick up the pieces. It's biodegradable. I'll let the birds have something to eat. No, I want you to see how much was left. I want you to experience the pieces. I want you to experience picking all this abundance up and putting it in the basket so that you will know who I am. You will know exactly who I am, and you will know exactly what I did, and it will be burned into your memory. Okay. Graduate school, getting a Bible degree. I'm in a class on educational techniques, and this professor says, first day of class, he says, we have this room down the hall, and it's full of stuff. And I want you to go down to this room and move all this equipment, tables and projectors and chairs and racks and carts and things. And we need to move them from one end of the building down to the other end of the building. And there's enough people here to do this rather quickly. So let's do this. And so all the students go down to this little storage room, actually a fairly large storage room, and we begin moving all this stuff. We get it all the way down to the other end. And then the professor comes down and says, hey, made a little mistake. Can you put that stuff back? And so we, oh my goodness, are you kidding? Why didn't you figure this out in advance? Why are you doing this to us, right? And so we start putting chairs on carts and things. Before it was like, here comes a cart, and and this guy's got a chair. Now it's like stacking chairs on carts and putting things on things and carrying things together. And it's like, okay, we've done this once before. We know how to do this better now. We were so much more efficient, but we were so frustrated. We get back in the classroom, and I almost want to say that he made us do it there and back again, but I don't quite remember that well enough to say it's true. So we get back to class. We are sweating. It's the first day of class. Why in the world did you get so confused? We had to keep doing this. And he says, okay, what did we learn from that? It's a class on education. He says, innovation. You all learned how to be innovative, because the first time it took you 37 minutes, and the second time it took you 26. You got better at it, innovative. You had to think creatively. How are we going to engage this and do this in an efficient manner? And so it was just an educational game. Like he was playing a game with our minds. That's what Jesus was doing. Guess what? I'm telling you the story now because out of all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of classes that I took in college and prior, that's what I remember. Jesus wants us to remember. And the way to help people remember is to allow them into the experience. And if I'm just being real here, real raw for a moment, the way we have conceptualized of things does not always allow for enough participation. And we need to think creatively about how to identify the giftedness of the people in the pew and then acknowledge their giftedness. Say, I see this in you. And challenge the church to have these conversations. We see this in you. And imagine someone coming up to you and saying the same thing over and over, saying, Steve or Bill or whoever is like, I see in you this gift of compassion. You say, wow, 5 people have told me that. Maybe it must be so. Say, how can I use that God-given gift, that God-given inclination to advance the kingdom, to allow people to experience the compassion of Christ or the generous nature of God? And then we need to not just acknowledge the giftedness and encourage the giftedness. We need to bless and send the giftedness out. Say, let's go and use these things to the people who need them most. And you see, now we're expanding the participation. And when we expand the participation, we are expanding the involvement, the investment, and the experience so that people will have a remembrance, a memory of being engaged in kingdom work. Coming to church and going, coming to church and going. There's some amazing things that happen on Sunday, a little bit limited right now, but we're very encouraged by Sunday. But we really need more participation of people, and that's often going to mean going outside of our normal routine of how we conceptualize involving people in the ministry of the church. Typically, the way we conceptualize involving people in the ministry of the church is we say, we have an involvement sheet and we have a list of needs to make church happen, and then we ask people to look at the list and then identify what they can do. That will always be needed. But we need to flip the process. We need to flip the script and say, it's not a list of what we need to do and then figure out who can do it. We need to look at our people and see what they can do and then figure out means of involving them in the process of picking up the pieces, of organizing the people, of seating them on the hill, of looking for some food to give to them, of engaging the woman at the well in this conversation about water and who has it and where does it come from. And the same with Nicodemus, and the same with the disciples in John 1. Come and see, come and see. This invitation to participation. My family lived in California for 3 years a while back, and we had heard about a lot of places like Yosemite or Los Angeles or Hollywood or San Diego or Hearst Castle, things like that, the redwoods and the sequoias, and we had heard about these things and we had seen them, but to actually go, we could within 3 or 4 or 5 hours we could see so much of California. To actually go and take our kids to see and experience these things, it's burned in your mind. It's burned in your mind because you were there. You were there when these things took place. We need to have more and more people be there when ministry takes place, when the poor are served, and when we're loving on people and meeting needs and we're reaching out into our community. Jesus is inviting us into a kingdom experience. Our churches need to be inviting people as Jesus invites people into a kingdom experience. And it may be confusing, and you may not get all the answers that you want. And yes, you're going to be allowed to wrestle, and you're going to be allowed to fail. Think about the disciples at the bottom of Transfiguration, unable to cast out the demon because Jesus hadn't told them until after they failed that this kind only comes out through fasting and prayer. And yes, you won't get all the answers that you want, but Jesus will allow you and encourages you and invites you to seek, to ask questions, to discover, to get involved in the process, to go to the scriptures and look for the answers, to talk with fellow believers and look for the answers, to find out how to be involved in this kingdom mission, this kingdom experience that you are being beckoned into, that you are being invited into, because you belong there and you are welcome there, and it will always be home for us as Christians with Jesus participating in the mission of God. We need to make people curious. We like to be answer people. We like to be professional answer people. I like that role. It's great. But you know what? It's far better to make someone curious if the end goal is not just teaching, if the end goal is memory and formation. It's a far better approach to follow Jesus' example, to allow people to be inquisitive, to ask questions instead of giving answers, to walk alongside and allow people to experience things and then debrief on the other side and talk about what happened. And the more we do that, the more we're doing it Jesus' way, and the more mature our fellow Christians and ourselves are going to be in our life of faith. So think creatively about this, pray about this, talk to each other about what your gifts are and how you might be able to leverage those for the good of the kingdom, which is far beyond 1 hour a week. It's far beyond your church address on a Sunday morning at a particular time. You are being sent on a daily basis to engage your community, but so many Christians don't know what their gifts are and they don't feel empowered to use them. I'm telling you, you don't need another person to tell you that you are empowered to use your gifts. If Jesus gave the gifts, if the Spirit gave the gifts, that is the empowerment to use them. And just like the parable of the talents, we are expected to use the resources and talents that we've been given for the betterment of the King and his kingdom. And you will not find any better way to use your time in this life than that. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. I appreciate you, and I hope it's been thought-provoking and challenging, maybe a new light on some of the things that we've been talking about, or maybe you've already thought about all this before. Maybe it's just a good reminder, but I appreciate you watching. I wish we could connect in person, but this is what we can do for now, and I appreciate being invited into this process to experience this with you. God bless you. Take care.
Well, Matt, we want to thank you once again for that message and for speaking to us. I told you would not be disappointed, giving us so much to think about as we think about the power of conversations and what we draw from these lessons from Jesus in the Gospel of John. Friends, we're winding down. This is our last week that we have scheduled for these online recorded lessons for our summer series. Beginning next week, on August the 5th, Wednesday night, we're going to resume our service at the building on Wednesday evenings, and we will continue our summer series in person. We will also be recording those lessons as well that we'll be posting on our YouTube channel, but we are resuming our Wednesday night service at the building. And so next Wednesday evening, we'll be at the building, 7 p.m. Hope that you'll join us. Brother Keith Thompson, the pulpit minister for the Downtown Church of Christ in Bixby, Oklahoma, will be speaking to us on our summer series, and we hope that you'll join us for that. Again, we'll also be having the lessons on our YouTube channel as well for those not able to be with us here at the building. We hope to see you Sunday morning for worship at 9 a.m. and Bible class that will follow that worship, and we'll see you then, Lord willing. Thank you.